Hello, everybody, and welcome to my brand new channel of podcasts and my first ever podcast. Today, we're gonna discuss how fashion is indicative of cultural identity in my country, Bolivia, why some traditional styles are embraced and others not, and how the decisions made in between affect Bolivian self-esteem and connection to their heritage. I want to analyze everything involved in fashion in Bolivia because it can be very controversial. The Occidental traditional clothing tends to bring shame, while the Oriental not. People don't want to be associated with indigenous roots in a country where the majority of people is indigenous. The traditional fashion from the Oriente only brings pride, which is very interesting since in the other side of the country it doesn't. This topic is very important to me because I will obviously love to explain and talk about it in detail. So let's go. Let's start with brief history. So, as many of you might not know, Bolivia is a country rich in diversity, which features a range of ethnic groups and cultural traditions. This is so big that Bolivia has 32 different languages that are official. The diversity is notably pronounced when comparing the Occidental, Western, and the Oriental, Eastern regions of Bolivia. The Occidental is characterized by its high Andean plateaus, snowy mountains, and a majority of Quechua and Aymara indigenous population. These people are the direct descendants of Inca people. This region also includes cities like La Paz and Oruro, where traditional customs are deeply integrated into daily life. In some parts of Occidental Bolivia, there's a noted uncertainty or even shame associated with indigenous roots, which is influenced by historical discrimination and a preference for Western-style modernization, which may be perceived as a more prestigious or forward-thinking. On the other hand, with the Oriental Bolivia, it consists mainly of the lowland areas, especially those near the Amazon rainforest, which includes the department of Santa Cruz, my hometown, which is also known for its more tropical climate and diverse cultural makeup, including the Mestizos, Afro-Bolivians, and smaller indigenous groups like the Guarani, which is an ethnic group shared by Paraguay, Brazil, and Bolivia. This region is generally more associated with agricultural prosperity and has been less influenced by the traditional indigenous cultures that characterize Bolivia. The people here often express a strong regional pride that embraces a distinct identity, partly in reaction to the political and economic dominance of the highland regions. The contrast ways in which these two regions relate to traditional clothing reflect these broader cultural dynamics. In the Oriente, traditional clothing and customs can be a source of pride and celebration of local identity, often showcased in festivals and public events. But in contrast, in the Occident, traditional might sometimes be seen as a marker of backwardness or less desirable economic or social status, leading to a more complex, sometimes reluctant relationship with traditional to garments. Let's talk about some cultural significance. The pollera from Occidental Bolivia. The pollera is a traditional skirt worn by women in the Occidental region of Bolivia. It is characterized by its bright, multi-layered fabric and intricate embroidery. The pollera is not merely a piece of clothing, but it's also a statement of cultural pride and resilience. Each design element in the pollera, from the colors chosen to the style of the embroidery, can tell a story about the wearer's community, marital status, and social position. It's even said that polleras tend to be very expensive, which usually cost around 3,000 Bolivianos to 15,000 Bolivianos, which will be about 700 euros to 3,000 euros. Historically, wearing a pollera was a form of resistance. Back in the day, the polleras symbolized the women's refusal to abandon their cultural identity in the face of Spanish colonial influence and the modernization pressures. Another very emblematic traditional clothing is the sombrero de sao. The sombrero de sao, on the other hand, is a traditional hat from the Oriental region in Bolivia, and unlike the pollera, the sombrero is typically worn by men and is deeply associated with the cowboy culture of the eastern lands, which includes large cattle ranches and a lifestyle connected to the vast plains of the region. This hat is usually made from durable palm leaves. This designed to protect the men's from the harsh sun. This hat symbolizes individualism and practically, but also a deep sense of local pride and belonging. It reflects the values of the Oriente Boliviano, which are autonomy, endurance, and a connection to a land. In Bolivia, the traditional attire from different regions not only carries cultural significance, but is also intertwined with social, political meanings, which can reflect broader societal attitudes and even political agendas. In contrast, in the Oriente Boliviano, these items, like the sombrero de sao or the white suit, even the chinelas, or also known as alpargatas, enjoys a very positive reception. In these regions, these traditional accessories are worn with pride and are seen as an important cultural symbol that represent the unique identity and heritage of the local people. Unlike in the Occidental region, wearing traditional clothing in the Oriente is less politically charged and is more about a cultural representation and regional pride. This positive embrace can be attributed to fewer historical external oppression and a more homogenized cultural narrative that celebrates rather than stigmatizes traditional lifestyles. Traditional clothing is used as a way to represent resistance and rebellion against the extreme dictatorship that is going on in Bolivia right now. The Kamba costume, or my traditional costume, is a symbol of rebellion, is a symbol of the youth standing against police, is a symbol of unity. So that's what makes my costume beautiful, all the meanings. Actually, I have a few anecdotes with this. Back in 2019, in October to be specific, the civil strike took place when the whole country united and blockaded the economy and kicked out a dictator, Evo Morales. During this time, I learned many valuable lessons. One of those is taking pride of who you are, what you think, and defend your identity and culture. It was during this time that I realized that the only enemy for a Bolivian was not a Bolivian, was the government. I realized it was the government who was separating the Occidental and the Oriental region by making people hate each other. But it was during this time that I realized we are all the same and we have to be proud of each other. There should not be a region or a costume associated with negative things. They both have rich history. I even joined the Casa de la Juventud Cruceña, which was a resistance movement against the government. We were all dressed with our sombrero de sao, with our white costumes and our brown chinelas. And our goal was to try and unite everyone. It didn't matter where were you from. Our goal was to help you, give you food, water, and continue with the fight. A key for the hate towards the Occidental traditional clothing is the role of media and politics. The media and political figures have a significant influence over how traditional attire is perceived in Bolivia. Media portrayal often shapes public perception. When traditional clothing is depicted in negative contexts or associated with poverty and crime, it reinforces stereotypes and prejudices. Political figures, by choosing to wear or endorse traditional garments, can lend them prestige and validity, or conversely use them to manipulate public opinion for electoral gain. The interplay between media, representation, and political manipulation of traditional attire illustrates the complex ways in which fashion is intertwined with power structures and social norms. Guys, throughout this podcast, we've delved into the rich tapestry of Bolivia's traditional fashion, exploring how it both reflects and influences the country's cultural and social political landscape. We've seen the contrasting perception of traditional attire in the Occidental and Oriental region, how in some areas such accessories are burdened with the stereotypes of poverty, while others are celebrated as proud emblems of regional identity and resistance. As a native of Santa Cruz, I personally feel a strong connection to our traditional attire. Wearing this attire or clothes is not just a matter of style, but a proud statement of where I'm from, what I represent, and my culture. It's a symbol of resilience and my celebration of unique cultural identity. This personal connection reinforces my belief that embracing our traditional garments can play a pivotal role in fostering a broader acceptance and understanding of our diverse cultural backgrounds. Addressing the negative perceptions and political manipulations of traditional fashion is crucial. I encourage all of you guys to reflect on the traditional fashion within your own cultures. I want you to consider its significance and what it represents about your heritage. Let's start more conversations about the role of traditional attire in shaping our identities and perceptions. By doing so, we can also challenge stereotypes and promote a deeper appreciation for a diversity that enriches our communities. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Bolivia's traditional fashion landscape. Let's continue to celebrate and respect our traditional garments, recognize them not only as fashion but as a powerful symbol of who we are, where we are, and where we come from. Thank you, guys.